Good afternoon and welcome back to Truth Worth Living, where we seek to understand God's Word so we can live in God's will. As you know, we've been studying the disciples, and our study today leads us to Philip. Now, Philip is literally an example of Jesus' statement in John 15:16 when he said, "You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you to go and bear fruit that will last." Philip actually appears to be the first of the apostles that Jesus sought out. And frankly, that's surprising because if we were building a team of revolutionaries who were seeking to do the impossible and turn the world upside down, Philip would actually, I think, be the poster child for the person we would stay away from. Here's the way it unfolded in John chapter 1. The next day, Jesus decided to leave for Galilee. Finding Philip, he said to him, "Follow me." Philip, like Andrew and Peter, was from the town of Bethsaida. So obviously, Jesus goes out of his way, hunts down Philip, and as it happened, Philip immediately goes all in. The text then goes on to say that having been invited to join the disciples, Philip straightaway goes out and finds Nathanael and tells him that he has to meet Jesus. Now, you may be thinking, well, what's wrong with that? That just seems like the natural thing, right? People meet Jesus and then they want their friends to meet him. While it may be natural for some of us, it actually wasn't for Philip, not at all. He just wasn't one of those guys. He's one of those people who have to have all the facts before making a decision. He's the guy who gathers information, catalogs it, and then systematically processes it, and then processes it again. He's the guy who will only play the game if he's guaranteed to win. Of Philip, John MacArthur wrote, "Philip was a classic process person. He was a facts and figures guy, by the book, practical, non-visionary. He was the kind who tends to be a corporate killjoy, pessimistic, narrowly focused, sometimes missing the big picture, often obsessed with identifying reasons things can't be done, rather than finding ways to get them done." Now, this makes Philip's call and rapid response to Jesus, frankly, shocking. And it sparks two questions. First, why would Jesus want one of those guys on his team? He, as I said, he's trying to start a revolution, and a bean counter like Philip could only be an impediment. Yet, Jesus sought him out. Second, why would Philip jump at the invitation to follow Jesus as the Messiah when there was so little evidence to prove the claim and so few people believing it? It seems like a tremendous leap of faith for a guy like Phil who would actually never take the leap. Now, the answer to both questions is the same. When a guy like Philip is convinced, he's unwavering in his devotion. Yes, he needs to be convinced, but when he is, nothing's going to dissuade him from living the truth. Now, what Jesus intended to do with Philip as he trained him was convince him that sometimes he needed to make space for faith in his process, because with Jesus, the numbers aren't always going to add up. Do you remember Philip's role in feeding the 5,000? Probably not, because he didn't do anything except try to throw a wet blanket on the entire picnic. But Jesus used that occasion to expose the weakness in Philip's worldview and shore it up with a lesson on faith. Listen to John 6, verses 5 through 7. When Jesus looked up and saw a great crowd coming toward him, he said to Philip, "Where shall we buy bread for these people to eat?" He's talking to Philip. He asked this only to test him, for he already had in mind what he was going to do. Philip, the bean counter, answered him, "It would take more money than half a year's wages to buy enough bread for each one of these people to have a bite." In other words, Philip was saying, "Jesus, the numbers don't add up. It can't be done. We don't have that kind of money." Now, why would Jesus turn to Philip with such a question? John tells us he only did it to test him. The test was designed to help Philip be able to identify the difference between his perspective and Jesus' perspective. He needed to see the difference between calculations, formulas, and projections without faith and calculations, formulas, and projections with it. Now, there's no problem with having the facts and the figures all sorted out. Jesus taught the importance of counting the cost. But what he wanted Philip to consider in his calculations was that nothing was too difficult when God is involved. So he should never allow facts and figures to trump his faith. Faith responsibly counts the cost and then reasons that if God has required it, God will resource it. Faith was the weakness of Philip's worldview, and the test led him to face it. Philip was a process person. There's nothing wrong with that. God made him that way. And Jesus recognized that he needed that kind of person on his team. But we have to recognize, as Philip surely did, that our strengths are best utilized when they are subordinate to God's vision and applied in faith. God made Philip to be the numbers guy, and God intended to use Philip just as he was. He just needed to add faith to his calculations. And if he learned to do that, God could do great things through him. And what was true of Philip is truth for us to live by. And this is truth worth living. Thank you so much for joining me today. And let me just say, I hope you have a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. I look forward to seeing you right back here in 2025. Have a great afternoon.